It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the sun shines just enough to make you forget that life is, in fact, a never-ending series of disappointments. John Carter, attorney-at-law and self-proclaimed defender of the mildly inconvenienced, was sipping his third cup of coffee while mentally preparing for another day of fighting the good fight. Little did he know, the universe had other plans for him. Plans that involved a bright yellow will clamp and a homeowners association, HOA, with a god complex. John stepped outside, ready to conquer the day, only to be greeted by the sight of his beloved car. A 2012 Honda Civic with a dented bumper and a personality. Sitting helplessly on his own driveway, its front wheel clamped like a prisoner in a low-budget action movie. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. Maybe the coffee was spiked. Maybe he was still asleep. Maybe this was some twisted prank by his neighbor, Old Man Jenkins, who had a strange obsession with garden gnomes and passive-aggressive notes. But no, this was real. The clamp was real. The bright orange sticker slapped on his windshield was real. And the audacity? Oh, that was very real. The sticker read, "Violation. Parking on private property without permission. To remove clamp, call 1-800-CLAMPED. Fee, $250. John blinked, then blinked again, then let out a laugh so loud it probably woke up Karen White, the president of the HOA 3 streets over. Private property? He muttered to himself, pacing around his car like a lawyer about to deliver a closing argument to an empty courtroom. This is private property. My private property. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the sticker. After being on hold for what felt like an eternity, and listening to a looped rendition of Careless Whisper that made him question his life choices, a bored voice finally answered. Clamp Masters Incorporated. How can we unruin your day? Yeah, hi, John said, trying to keep his voice calm. My car has been clamped. On my own property. Care to explain? The voice on the other end sighed, as if this was a daily occurrence. Sir, you violated HOA Rule 47B. No parking on private property without prior approval from the HOA. John's eye twitched. But it's my property. Not according to the HOA. The voice replied cheerfully. That'll be $250. Cash or card? John hung up. He wasn't about to pay $250 to some glorified parking vigilantes. Not today. Not ever. As he stood there, fuming, his neighbor Mike, a plumber with a knack for fixing things and a love for conspiracy theories, wandered over, holding a cup of coffee and a smirk. Got yourself clamped, huh? Mike said, nodding at the offending device. Welcome to the club. They got me last week for leaving my trash cans out too long. Apparently, they're an eyesore. Karen's words, not mine. John raised an eyebrow. Karen? As in Karen White, the HOA president. The one and only, Mike said, rolling his eyes. She's got a clipboard, a bad attitude, and a dream of turning this neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. Rumor has it she's planning to build herself a private pool with all the fines she's collecting. John's mind raced. This wasn't just about a clamp anymore. This was about justice. This was about principle. This was about sticking it to a woman who probably ironed her socks and thought beige was a personality trait. Mike, John said, a slow grin spreading across his face. How would you like to help me take down the HOA? Mike's eyes lit up. I thought you'd never ask. Over the next few hours, John and Mike dug into the HOA's bylaws, uncovering a treasure trove of ridiculous rules and questionable practices. They discovered that Karen White had been using Clamp Masters Incorporated to enforce her draconian policies, all while skimming a portion of the fines for herself. The private pool rumor? It was true. Karen had even named the project Karen's Oasis, a name so pretentious it made John want to gag. But the real kicker? The HOA had no legal authority to clamp cars on private property. None. Zip. Nada. It was all a scam, a power trip, a middle finger to common sense. John leaned back in his chair, a fire in his eyes. This isn't just about my car anymore. This is about every person who's ever been bullied by an HOA. This is about taking down Karen White and her empire of nonsense. Mike raised his coffee cup in a toast. To justice. To justice, John echoed, clinking his mug against Mike's. And so the battle began. John Carter, the lawyer who once fought for multimillion-dollar corporations, was now taking on his greatest adversary yet. A woman with a clipboard, a bad haircut, and a dream of world domination. One parking violation at a time. Little did Karen know, she had just picked a fight with the wrong guy. And John, well, he was about to make her regret it. John Carter was not a man who did things halfway. When he decided to take down the HOA, he didn't just dip his toes in the water. He cannonballed into the deep end, splashing chaos everywhere. Armed with a laptop, a mountain of coffee, and a burning desire to ruin Karen White's day, John began his investigation. His first stop, the HOA's official website, a digital nightmare of Comic Sans font and stock photos of smiling families who clearly didn't live in the neighborhood. Buried beneath layers of poorly designed menus, John found the HOA's bylaws. A 47-page document that read like a dystopian novel written by someone who really loved rules. "Mike, listen to this," John said, reading aloud. Section 12, subsection C. All lawn ornaments must face eastward to maximize aesthetic harmony. Who even thinks of this stuff? Mike, who was busy eating a sandwich that was 90% mayonnaise, shrugged. Karen, probably. She's got a lot of time on her hands. And a lot of opinions about gnomes. John scrolled further, his eyes narrowing as he found the section on parking violations. According to the bylaws, the HOA had the authority to enforce parking rules on common areas, but said nothing about private driveways. Yet, somehow, Karen had convinced Clamp Masters Incorporated to start clamping cars on private property. "This is illegal," John muttered, his lawyer senses tingling. Like super illegal. But John wasn't just a lawyer. He was a man on a mission. He needed proof, solid, undeniable proof, that Karen was abusing her power. And so, he and Mike embarked on a neighborhood-wide investigation, knocking on doors and gathering intel like a pair of bumbling private detectives. Their first interview was with Linda, a single mom who had been fined $100 for having a non-regulation mailbox. "It's a flamingo mailbox," Linda explained, her voice tinged with frustration. "My daughter picked it out. Karen said it disrupted the visual cohesion of the neighborhood. Whatever that means." John nodded sympathetically. "Did she say anything else?" Linda hesitated. "Well, she did mention something about using the fines to fund a community project. But honestly, I think she's just pocketing the money." John's eyes lit up. "A community project, huh? Like, say, a private pool?" Linda's jaw dropped. "How did you know?" As the days went on, John and Mike uncovered more and more evidence of Karen's shady dealings. They learned that Clamp Masters Incorporated was owned by Karen's brother-in-law, a man named Greg who had a history of running questionable businesses, including a failed pet grooming service called Positively Clamped. They also discovered that Karen had been funneling HOA funds into her Karen's Oasis project, a luxury pool and spa that would be exclusively for the HOA board members. "Of course it's called Karen's Oasis," John said, rolling his eyes, "because nothing says relaxation like a pool funded by other people's misery." But the real smoking gun came when Mike hacked into the HOA's email server, a skill he claimed to have learned from a YouTube tutorial. Among the countless emails about lawn care and holiday decorations, they found a thread between Karen and Greg titled Project Oasis. Phase 1. John leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Gotcha." With the evidence in hand, John began drafting his lawsuit. But this wasn't just any lawsuit. It was a masterpiece of legal brilliance and petty revenge. He sued the HOA for abuse of power, fraud, and emotional distress, citing the trauma of seeing his car clamped on his own property. He also named Karen and Greg as co-defendants, accusing them of conspiracy and unjust enrichment. As he typed up the final draft, John couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about sending a message to Karen, to the HOA, and to anyone who thought they could push people around with a clipboard and a bad attitude. "Mike," John said, hitting the print button, "we're about to make history." Mike, who was now eating a bag of chips, nodded. Just promise me one thing. What's that? When this is over, we get to throw a pool party at Karen's oasis. John laughed. Deal. The next morning, John filed the lawsuit and sent a copy to Karen via certified mail. He included a handwritten note that read, Dear Karen, I hope you like the attached documents. Consider it my contribution to your community wellness initiative. Sincerely, John Carter. And with that, the battle was officially on. Karen's empire of nonsense was about to come crashing down, and John Carter was ready to deliver the final blow. John Carter had always dreamed of his day in court. Not as a defendant, of course, but as the hero of a legal drama so epic it would make law and order look like a traffic court hearing. And now, thanks to Karen White and her HOA shenanigans, that dream was about to become a reality. The morning of the trial, John woke up feeling like a mix between Atticus Finch and Batman. He put on his best suit, polished his shoes, and even practiced his objection face in the mirror. It was a good face, a great face. Karen didn't stand a chance. Mike, ever the loyal sidekick, showed up at John's door with a box of donuts and a thermos of coffee. Breakfast of champions, he said, handing John a jelly-filled donut. Let's go crush Karen's dreams. John grinned. Mike, my friend, today is the day justice is served. And by justice, I mean sweet, sweet revenge. The courtroom was packed. Word of John's lawsuit had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and everyone wanted a front row seat to the showdown. Even Old Man Jenkins was there, clutching a bag of popcorn and muttering something about finally seeing Karen get what she deserves. Karen, meanwhile, sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, a slick-looking man named Richard who probably charged $500 an hour to say things like, objection and your honor. Karen herself looked as smug as ever, wearing a pantsuit so beige it practically screamed, I'm here to ruin your day. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Martinez, called the court to order. All right, folks, let's get this show on the road. Plaintiff, you're up. John stood, adjusted his tie, and approached the podium. Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, today we're here to talk about one thing. Abuse of power. Specifically, the abuse of power by the HOA and its president, Karen White. He launched into his opening statement, laying out the case with the precision of a surgeon and the flair of a stand-up comedian. He talked about the illegal clamping, the embezzled funds, and the absurd rules that made living in the neighborhood feel like being trapped in a poorly written sitcom. Your Honor, John said, holding up a copy of the HOA bylaws. This document is 47 pages long. 47 pages. That's longer than The Great Gatsby, and at least Gatsby had a point. This is just a list of ways to make people miserable. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even Judge Martinez cracked a smile. John's first witness was Linda, the single mom with the flamingo mailbox. She took the stand and recounted her ordeal with Karen, describing how she'd been fined for a mailbox that disrupted the visual cohesion of the neighborhood. And what did you do after receiving the fine? John asked. I cried, Linda said, her voice trembling. Then I paid it because I didn't think I had a choice. John nodded sympathetically. No one should have to live in fear of their mailbox, Linda. Thank you. Next up was Mike, who testified about the HOA's shady dealings with Clamp Masters Incorporated. He even brought a diagram he'd made, showing how Karen and Greg had funneled money into the Karen's Oasis project. And what is Karen's Oasis? John asked, pointing to the diagram. It's a private pool, Mike said, deadpan, because nothing says community wellness like excluding the community. The courtroom laughed again. Karen, meanwhile, looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. When it was the defense's turn, Richard tried his best to salvage the situation. He argued that the HOA was simply trying to maintain aesthetic standards and that the clamping was a necessary deterrent. Your Honor, Richard said, my client was acting in the best interest of the neighborhood. Sometimes, tough love is required. Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow. Tough love? Clamping someone's car on their own property isn't tough love, counselor. It's trespassing. Richard opened his mouth to respond, then thought better of it and sat down. The final blow came when John called Karen to the stand. She took the oath with all the enthusiasm of someone about to get a root canal, then sat down and glared at John like he'd personally offended her by existing. "Ms. White," John began, "can you explain why you felt it was necessary to clamp cars on private property?" Karen straightened her already straight posture. "As president of the HOA, it's my duty to enforce the rules. If people don't like it, they can move." John nodded, pretending to consider this. "Interesting. And what about the funds collected from these fines? Where did that money go?" Karen hesitated. It went toward community projects." John smiled. "Community projects like, say, a private pool for the HOA board members?" Karen's face turned red. That's not what it was for." John pulled out the email thread between Karen and Greg and handed it to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this as evidence. It clearly shows Ms. White discussing the use of fine money to fund her Karen's Oasis project." Judge Martinez skimmed the emails, her expression growing darker by the second. "Ms. White, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. As John wrapped up his case, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He'd exposed Karen's corruption, rallied the neighborhood, and maybe, just maybe, taught the HOA a lesson about messing with the wrong guy. "Your Honor," John said, addressing the court one last time, "this case isn't just about a car clamp or a mailbox. It's about accountability. It's about standing up to bullies. And it's about making sure no one has to live in fear of their own HOA." The courtroom erupted in applause. Even Judge Martinez looked impressed. As for Karen, well, let's just say she wasn't clapping. The courtroom was silent as Judge Martinez prepared to deliver her verdict. Karen White sat at the defendant's table, her beige pantsuit now looking more like a symbol of defeat than authority. John Carter, on the other hand, looked like a man who had just won the lottery, if the lottery was made entirely of justice and spite. After reviewing the evidence, Judge Martinez began, her voice firm and unwavering. "It is clear that the HOA, under the leadership of Ms. Karen White, has engaged in a pattern of abusive and illegal behavior. The clamping of vehicles on private property, the misappropriation of funds, and the blatant disregard for the rights of homeowners cannot and will not be tolerated." Karen's face turned pale. Richard, her lawyer, started sweating so much he looked like he'd just run a marathon. "Therefore," Judge Martinez continued, "I rule in favor of the plaintiff. The HOA is hereby ordered to cease all illegal activities, return all improperly collected fines, and dissolve its current board of directors. Additionally, Ms. White and Mr. Greg Thompson are to pay $50,000 in damages to the affected homeowners." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Linda cried tears of joy. Mike pumped his fist in the air. Even Old Man Jenkins threw his popcorn in celebration. John turned to Karen, a triumphant smile on his face. "Looks like Karen's Oasis just became Karen's Swamp." The aftermath of the trial was nothing short of glorious. Karen was forced to step down as HOA president, and the neighborhood elected a new board, one that actually cared about the community. The funds for Karen's Oasis were reallocated to build a public park, complete with a playground, picnic tables, and a plaque that read, "Dedicated to the residents who stood up to tyranny." As for John, he became a local hero. People stopped him on the street to shake his hand and thank him for taking down the HOA. His law practice boomed, with clients lining up to hire the man who had defeated Karen White. But the best part? The pool. Thanks to a loophole in the HOA's bylaws and a little creative lawyering, John was able to claim the half-finished Karen's Oasis as community property. He turned it into a public pool, open to everyone in the neighborhood. On the grand opening day, John stood at the edge of the pool, wearing a Hawaiian shirt and holding a piña colada. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "welcome to John's Justice Pool, where the water is always fine and the HOA is always banned." The crowd cheered. Mike cannonballed into the pool. Linda's daughter splashed around in her flamingo flow tie. Even Old Man Jenkins dipped his toes in. though he complained that the water was too wet. As the sun set on the neighborhood, John sat by the pool, reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been a long, crazy journey, but it was worth it. He'd taken down a tyrant, united a community, and proven that even the smallest person can make a big difference. You know, Mike said, joining him with a beer in hand, this might be the best thing that's ever happened to this neighborhood. John grinned. And to think, it all started with a clamp. Hit that like button if you've ever dreamed of sticking it to an HOA. Share this video with anyone who's ever been fined for having the wrong mailbox. And subscribe for more tales of triumph, humor, and the occasional pool party. Remember, folks, justice isn't just a word, it's a lifestyle. And sometimes it comes with a piña colada.